The dust-choked wind howled through the valley as Silas Thornton dragged his eldest daughter by her hair across the yard of their dilapidated homestead. Blood trickled from her split lip, but 18-year-old Sarah Thornton refused to give her father the satisfaction of hearing her cry out. Her sisters, Emily and Rebecca, watched in horror from the window of the shack they called home, tears streaming silently down their faces. This was life in Oro Grande, New Mexico Territory, 1878, a life of fear, pain, and desperate prayers for salvation that seemed to fall on deaf ears. 10 miles away, Garrett Maxwell stared at the horizon, unaware that his destiny awaited him in the form of 3 young women who needed a hero more than they needed their next breath. Sarah winced as she dabbed at her swollen eye with a damp cloth. At 22, she had endured her father's violence longer than anyone should. Her mother had died bringing Rebecca into the world 6 years ago, leaving Sarah to protect her younger sisters as best she could. Emily, now 19, sat beside her, gently plaiting Rebecca's hair, trying to distract the 12-year-old from the bruises darkening on Sarah's face. "He's getting worse," Emily whispered, careful not to let their father hear from where he lay passed out drunk in the next room. "One day he's going to kill one of us." Sarah squeezed her sister's hand. "I won't let that happen." "How can you stop him?" Emily's voice trembled. "We have nowhere to go, no money, no SHH," Sarah interrupted, hearing the creak of their father's bed. "Not now." Rebecca looked up, her blue eyes wide with fear. "Is he coming?" The floorboards groaned under Silas Thornton's weight as he stumbled into the kitchen. His bloodshot eyes narrowed as he looked at his daughters. At 45, years of hard living, drinking, and rage had carved deep lines into his weathered face. "Still sitting around, useless as ever," he snarled, reaching for the jug of whiskey on the table. "This place is falling apart and you 3 just sit here like fine ladies." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "We've done all the chores, Pa. The washing's hung, the chickens are fed, and Emily started supper." Silas took a long swig from the jug. "Don't sass me, girl. This worthless piece of land ain't producing enough to keep us fed, and I'm tired of scratching in the dirt while we starve." "We could try planting more in the south field," Sarah suggested cautiously. "The soil there is," the back of Silas's hand connected with her cheek before she could finish, sending her sprawling. Rebecca screamed, and Emily pulled her close, shielding the child's eyes. "I've had enough of your ideas," Silas growled. "Been thinking on something for a while now. Old Jameson over at the saloon's been looking for a new girl to serve drinks and keep the miners company. Says he'd pay good money for a young one like you, Sarah." Sarah's blood ran cold. Everyone knew what happened to saloon girls at Jameson's establishment. They weren't just serving drinks. "I won't go," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Silas laughed, an ugly sound that made the girl's skin crawl. "Ain't asking you. Already made the deal. He's sending someone tomorrow to collect you." He took another drink. "And if things work out, might be Emily will follow soon enough." Emily gasped, her face draining of color. Sarah pushed herself up from the floor, standing between her father and her sisters. "You can't sell us like cattle," she said, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "Can and will," Silas replied. "This is my property, and that includes you 3. About time you started earning your keep in this world." That night, huddled together on the thin mattress they shared, the sisters whispered desperately in the darkness. "We have to run," Emily urged. "Tonight while he's sleeping." Sarah shook her head. "He'd catch us before we got 5 miles. And then what? He'd beat us worse than ever, maybe kill one of us to teach the others a lesson. But if we stay—" Emily couldn't finish the thought. Sarah held her sisters close. "I'll think of something, I promise." But as dawn crept over the horizon, Sarah had no plan. She moved mechanically through her chores, mind racing for a solution that wouldn't come. When the sound of hoofbeats approached their homestead around noon, her heart sank. Time had run out, but it wasn't Jameson's man who rode up to their door. Instead, a tall stranger on a magnificent chestnut stallion pulled up to the hitching post. Dust coated his denim pants, and the blue cotton shirt rolled up at the sleeves. A worn leather hat shaded piercing green eyes that took in the run-down homestead with a single sweep. "This the Thornton place?" he called out. Sarah stepped cautiously onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, sir." The stranger dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Name's Garrett Maxwell, looking for Silas Thornton about a horse he was selling." Before Sarah could respond, Silas emerged from the barn, eyes narrowing at the sight of the stranger. "You from Jameson?" he demanded. "No, sir. Heard you had a stallion for sale. Quarter horse, they said." Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt. "Might have. Depends on what you're offering." As the men walked toward the corral, Sarah caught Emily watching the stranger from the window. There was something about him, a steadiness, a quiet strength that made her wonder if perhaps their prayers hadn't been ignored after all. Garrett Maxwell had not come to Oro Grande looking for trouble. After 5 years driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, he'd saved enough to start his own small ranch. He'd heard about a promising piece of land near Oro Grande and a decent stallion for sale that would make a good foundation for a breeding program. What he found instead at the Thornton place made his jaw clench and his hand instinctively move closer to the revolver at his hip. He'd recognized the fear in Sarah Thornton's eyes immediately. He'd seen it before in women and children living under the fist of a violent man. The bruise on her cheek told him all he needed to know about Silas Thornton. As they walked to the corral, Garrett took stock of the property, the neglected fields, the leaning fence posts, the general air of decay. This was the home of a man who cared more for the bottle than his land or family. "That's him there," Silas said, pointing to a bay stallion with a white blaze down his face. The horse was indeed a fine animal, though underfed and in need of proper care. $200 and he's yours." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "Steep price for these parts." "Take it or leave it," Silas growled. "Got another buyer coming later today anyway." "For the horse?" Garrett asked casually. Silas's gaze slid toward the house. "Got some other business arranged too. Man's coming to collect my eldest for work in town." The casual way Thornton spoke of collecting his daughter made Garrett's blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral. "I see. Well, I'll take a look at this stallion if you don't mind." As Garrett examined the horse, his mind worked quickly. The pieces were falling into place: Thornton's need for money, his reference to collecting his daughter, the fear in the young woman's eyes. He'd heard stories about Jameson's saloon in town and the girls who worked there. Some came willingly, drawn by the promise of easy money. Others were sold into that life by desperate or greedy family members. "He's worth $150, not a penny more," Garrett said finally, "but I might be interested in more than just the horse." Silas eyed him suspiciously. "What else you looking for?" "Heard you might have some help to spare around here. Been looking for someone to cook and keep house at my new place." Garrett nodded toward the house. "That your daughter I met seems capable." A calculating look crossed Silas's face. "She is, but she's promised elsewhere. Got 2 others, though." Garrett leaned against the fence post, adopting a casual posture. 3 daughters, huh? Must be a handful for a man on his own." "More trouble than they are worth," Silas muttered. "Eat too much, work too little. What if I took all 3 off your hands?" Garrett suggested, his heart pounding despite his even tone. Save you the trouble of feeding them, get you some cash in hand now instead of waiting on payments from Jameson. Silas studied him, suspicious. What would you want with 3 girls? Garrett shrugged. Like I said, need someone to cook and clean. Starting a ranch takes work. Could use the extra hands. He paused. Plus, 3 pretty girls like that might attract some eligible ranchers to the area. Good way to build connections. The implication that Garrett might arrange marriages for the girls seemed to satisfy Silas, who was already calculating the potential profit. Jameson's offering $300 for Sarah alone. Emily would fetch at least $200 when she's ready. I'll give you $600 for all 3, plus $150 for the horse. That's $750 total. It was nearly all the money Garrett had saved, but he couldn't leave these girls to their fate. Silas's eyes widened at the sum. It was more money than he'd seen in years. Deal, he said quickly before Garrett could reconsider. But you take them now today. No coming back if they don't work out. Agreed, Garrett said, extending his hand to seal the bargain. As their palms met, he fought the urge to crush the older man's fingers. I'll get my money and be back within the hour. Sarah watched from the window as the stranger rode away. Something about the conversation between him and her father had changed Silas's demeanor. He stormed into the house, a dangerous gleam in his eye. Pack your things, all of you, he ordered. And put on your best dresses. Emily clutched Rebecca's hand. Why? What's happening? You've been sold, that's what, Silas announced with savage satisfaction. All 3 of you to that rancher. $750 he's paying for you and the bay stallion. Sarah felt the room spin. You can't already done, Silas cut her off. He'll be back soon with the money and you'll go with him. Be grateful I'm not sending you to Jameson's like I planned. As their father left to celebrate his windfall with a drink, the sisters stared at each other in shock. Sold, Rebecca whispered, her voice small, like slaves. Emily sank onto a chair, her face ashen. What do you think he wants with us? Sarah paced the small room. I don't know, he seemed different from Pa, the way he carried himself spoke. She paused. But that doesn't mean anything. Men can hide their true nature. What choice do we have? Emily asked. If we stay, Pa will just sell us to someone else. At least this way we stay together. Sarah nodded grimly. We'll go with him, but we'll be ready to run if we have to. They packed quickly, though they had little to take, a few dresses each, their mother's Bible, a hairbrush Sarah had saved for years to buy, and a small rag doll that was Rebecca's prized possession. Within the hour, they heard hoofbeats approaching once more. Garrett Maxwell returned leading a second horse with a small wagon attached. He counted out the money to Silas, who barely glanced at his daughters as he pocketed the cash. No refunds, Silas reminded him with a smirk. Garrett's expression remained impassive. Won't be necessary. As the girls loaded their meager belongings into the wagon, Silas disappeared into the house without a word of farewell. Rebecca began to cry silently, and Emily put an arm around her shoulders. All set? Garrett asked, his voice gentler than before. Sarah met his gaze squarely. What exactly have you purchased us for, Mr. Maxwell? To save you, he replied simply. Now climb up. We've got a ways to go, and I'd rather be off this property before your father changes his mind about the deal. The sisters exchanged glances. Something in his tone made Sarah want to believe him, but she'd learned the hard way not to trust a man's promises. We don't have much choice but to go with you, she said finally. But know this, we won't be mistreated. Not anymore. I'd rather die fighting than live through that again. Garrett's eyes softened. You have my word, Miss Thornton. No harm will come to you or your sisters in my care. He helped Rebecca into the wagon, then Emily. When he offered his hand to Sarah, she hesitated before accepting it, feeling the strength and calluses of a working man's grip. As they pulled away from the only home they'd ever known, none of the sisters looked back. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, following a winding trail through scrubby hills and across a shallow stream. The sisters sat huddled together in the wagon, uncertain of their future, but relieved to be away from their father's fists. Finally, Rebecca's curiosity overcame her fear. "Where are we going, mister?" Garrett glanced back at the child. "About 5 miles south of Oro Grande. I bought a small ranch there last week. Nothing fancy, but it's got good water and decent grazing land." "And what will happen to us there?" Emily asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face them directly. "Nothing you don't want to happen. I meant what I said back there. I bought you to save you, not to harm you." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Men don't just spend $700 out of kindness." "No," he agreed. "But sometimes they do it because it's right. I recognized what was happening back there. I've seen men like your father before." He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair streaked with gold from the sun. "My mother and sister lived under the fist of a man like that, my stepfather. I was too young to stop him then. I'm not too young now." The simple honesty in his words made Sarah's throat tighten. "What do you expect from us?" "Help with the ranch if you're willing. I need someone to cook and keep house while I get the place in working order. In exchange, you'll have food, shelter, and safety." He looked each sister in the eye. "When you're ready, I'll help you establish yourselves however you wish, whether that's arranging respectable marriages if you want them, setting you up with your own business in town, or helping you travel elsewhere. The choice will be yours." "You'd let us leave?" Emily asked, disbelieving. "You're not my property," Garrett said firmly. "I may have paid your father, but that was to get you away from him, not to own you. You're free women as far as I'm concerned." Rebecca wiped her tears with her sleeve. "I don't understand. If you're not keeping us, why did you buy us?" Garrett smiled gently at the girl. "Because it was the only way to get all 3 of you out of there safely. Your father wouldn't have let you go otherwise." Sarah studied him, searching for any sign of deception. She'd become good at reading men's intentions over the years, a necessary skill for survival. But she saw nothing in Garrett Maxwell's green eyes except sincerity. "Thank you," she said finally, the words feeling strange on her tongue. No one had done anything to deserve her gratitude in a very long time. Garrett nodded, replacing his hat. "We should keep moving. There's a storm brewing in the west." As they continued their journey, the sisters began to relax slightly, occasionally exchanging whispered observations about the changing landscape. The barren hills gave way to greener pastures, fed by a creek that wound through the valley. When they crested a rise, Garrett pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled against the foothills below. "That's it," he said. "Maxwell Ranch." It was modest, a main house of hewn logs with a covered porch, a barn, a corral, and a few outbuildings. But to the Thornton sisters, who had lived their entire lives in a one-room shack, it looked like a palace. "You live there alone?" Sarah asked as they approached. "For now," Garrett replied. "Had some help building it from neighbors, but it's just me since I moved in last week." As they pulled up to the house, Sarah noticed the fresh-cut lumber of the porch, the new glass in the windows, the solid door with its iron hinges. This was a home built with care and attention to detail. Inside, the main room was sparsely furnished but clean, with a large stone fireplace, a pine table with chairs, and a rocking chair near the hearth. Doorways led to what Sarah assumed were bedrooms. "The previous owner started the house but passed before finishing it," Garrett explained, helping them carry their few possessions inside. "I've been working on it since I arrived. There are 2 bedrooms, one for me, and one I thought the 3 of you could share for now." I can build another if you'd prefer more space. Sarah was overwhelmed by his consideration. One room is fine for us. We've always shared. The kitchen's through there, he continued, gesturing to a doorway. It's basic, but I've stocked some supplies. You'll find a washroom out back with a pump. I haven't had time to install one inside yet. Emily ran her hand over the smooth wooden table. It's lovely. Garrett looked embarrassed by the praise. It's a start. I'll give you some time to settle in. I need to get the stallion situated in the barn. After he left, the sisters explored their new surroundings with a mixture of caution and wonder. You think we can trust him? Emily whispered, peering out the window to where Garrett was leading the bay stallion into the barn. Sarah watched him too, noting the gentle way he handled the horse. I don't know, but he's shown us more kindness in one afternoon than Pa did in years. Rebecca had already claimed a corner of their bedroom, placing her rag doll carefully on the quilt-covered bed. I like him, she declared. He has kind eyes. Sarah smiled at her youngest sister's simple assessment. We'll see, Becca. For now, let's be grateful we're safe and together. That evening, Sarah prepared a simple meal from the supplies Garrett had stocked: beans, salt pork, and biscuits. As they ate together at the table, an awkward silence hung in the air until Rebecca broke it with her usual directness. Where are you from, Mr. Maxwell? Garrett looked relieved at the conversation opener. Texas originally. My family had a small ranch near San Antonio. Had? Emily asked. Lost it after my father died. My mother remarried a man who drank away whatever wasn't nailed down. His jaw tightened at the memory. After my mother passed and my sister got married, I started working cattle drives. Did that for 5 years, saved every penny. And now you're here, Sarah said. Garrett nodded. Wanted my own place. Land's cheaper here and there's good opportunity for a man willing to work. What are your plans for the ranch? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Horse breeding, mainly. Got connections with the army, they're always looking for good mounts. Plan to run some cattle too once I'm established. He glanced at the sisters. What about you three? Ever been to town much? Sarah shook her head. Pa kept us close to home, said town was no place for decent girls. Garrett's mouth twitched. Oro Grande's small, but it's growing. Got a general store, blacksmith, couple of churches. School too, though it only runs when they can find a teacher. Rebecca's eyes lit up. A school? Could I go? If you want to, Garrett replied. Though you might be ahead of what they're teaching if your sisters have been educating you. We've done our best, Sarah said. Our mother taught us to read and cipher before she died. I've tried to pass that on to Rebecca. Well, there's books in that trunk by the fireplace, Garrett offered. Not many, but you're welcome to them. And I'll take you into town soon to get whatever supplies you need. After supper, Garrett insisted on washing the dishes himself. You've done enough for your first day here, he told Sarah when she protested. Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll show you around the property. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed between her sisters, Sarah stared at the ceiling, trying to process the dramatic change in their circumstances. Part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop for Garrett Maxwell to reveal his true intentions. Men didn't rescue women out of pure altruism, not in her experience. Yet she couldn't deny the sense of safety she felt under this roof. For the first time in years, she didn't need to sleep with one ear open, alert for her father's drunken rage. The weight of constant vigilance began to lift, allowing exhaustion to pull her toward sleep. Her last conscious thought was a prayer that this sanctuary would prove real and lasting. The next morning, Sarah woke to the unfamiliar sound of silence. No angry voice demanding breakfast, no creaking floorboards signaling potential danger. Just the soft breathing of her sisters and birdsong from outside. She dressed quickly and slipped out to the kitchen, determined to have breakfast ready before their host awoke. To her surprise, Garrett was already up, coffee brewing on the stove. "Morning," he said, glancing up from the papers spread on the table. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in years," Sarah admitted. "I can take over breakfast, no rush. Coffee's hot if you want some." He gestured to a cup on the counter. Sarah hesitated before accepting it. The rich aroma made her realize how long it had been since she'd tasted real coffee. Her father always kept it for himself. "What are you working on?" she asked, nodding to the papers. "Plans for expanding the corral. Want to bring in a few mares once the stallion settled." He rolled up the diagram. "Though first priority is making sure you three have everything you need." "We don't need much," Sarah assured him. "Just knowing we're safe is enough." Garrett studied her face, his expression serious. "The bruise is fading, but you should put some witch hazel on it. There's a bottle in the washroom." Self-conscious, Sarah touched her cheek. "It's nothing." "It's evidence of a crime," Garrett replied quietly. "One your father should answer for." "He won't," Sarah said with certainty. "Men like him never do." "Some do." There was something in Garrett's tone that made Sarah look at him more closely. "Justice finds everyone eventually." Before she could respond, Emily and Rebecca joined them, and the conversation turned to plans for the day. After breakfast, Garrett showed them around the property, pointing out the creek that provided water year-round, the vegetable garden he'd started, and the boundaries of his land. "It's 200 acres, he explained as they stood on a rise overlooking the valley. "Not huge, but good land. Previous owner started clearing fields for planting before he died." "What happened to him?" Emily asked. "Heart gave out, from what I heard. His widow sold to me before heading back east to live with her daughter." As they walked back toward the house, Rebecca spotted a rabbit and darted after it, laughing for what seemed like the first time in ages. Emily followed, leaving Sarah and Garrett walking together. "Thank you," Sarah said after a moment. "Not just for taking us away from there, but for how you've treated us, especially Rebecca. She's been so frightened for so long." Garrett's expression softened. "She's a child. She deserves to laugh and play without fear." "We all were children once," Sarah murmured. "Some of us just had to grow up faster than others." Garrett glanced at her. "How old are you, Miss Thornton?" 22, she replied. "And please call me Sarah. After all, you've bought the right," she added with a hint of bitterness she couldn't quite suppress. Garrett stopped walking. "I meant what I said yesterday. That transaction with your father was a necessary evil to get you away safely. It gives me no rights over you or your sisters." Sarah met his gaze. "Then what am I to you? Not property, not family, not a wife. What place do we have here?" "Guests for now," he said simply. "Friends, I hope, in time. Beyond that, I don't know. I didn't plan this, Sarah. I went to your father's place to buy a horse and found something I couldn't walk away from." His honesty disarmed her. "I'm trying to understand." "Men don't usually act without expecting something in return." "I'm not most men." He resumed walking, hands tucked into his pockets. "My sister's husband rescued her from our stepfather when I was still too young to do anything. He didn't expect anything in return, though they fell in love later. Sometimes people just do the right thing because it's right." "And sometimes they don't," Sarah countered. "Most times, in my experience." Garrett nodded. "Fair enough. Time will prove my intentions better than words can." Over the next weeks, the sisters settled into life at Maxwell Ranch. Sarah took charge of the household, cooking meals and keeping the place in order. Emily, who had a natural affinity with animals, helped Garrett with the horses. Rebecca, freed from constant fear, blossomed like a flower, exploring the property and devouring the books in Garrett's small collection. True to his word, Garrett took them into Oro Grande to purchase necessities fabric for new dresses, proper shoes, personal items the girls had gone without for too long. The shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Henderson, raised eyebrows at the unusual group, but kept her thoughts to herself when Garrett explained they were relatives come to help with his new ranch. Not much to do in Oro Grande, Mrs. Henderson told them as she measured fabric, but we're getting more civilized. Church social next Saturday, you should come. Good way to meet folks. On the way back to the ranch, they passed Jameson's saloon. Sarah instinctively pulled Rebecca closer as they drove by the weathered building with its swinging doors and piano music spilling onto the street. Through the windows, she glimpsed young women in revealing dresses serving drinks to miners and cowboys. "That's where Pa was going to send me," she whispered to Emily. Garrett, overhearing, glanced at the saloon with disgust. No decent man would condemn a woman to that life. "Plenty do," Sarah replied, "when they need money more than they need their conscience." Garrett's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more until they were well past the town. That evening, as Sarah hung the new fabric to air before cutting, Garrett approached with a small package. "Got something for you when we were in town," he said, somewhat awkwardly. "For all of you, actually." Sarah unwrapped the brown paper to find 3 journals and a set of pencils. "What's this for?" "Thought you might want to write things down. Thoughts, memories, plans for the future." He shrugged. "My sister used to say writing helped her make sense of things when life got hard." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them back quickly. "Thank you. I'm sure we'll put them to good use." Later, Sarah wrote her first entry by candlelight while her sisters slept. She described the events of the past weeks, her lingering fears, and the strange sense of peace that was gradually replacing her constant anxiety. She wrote about Garrett Maxwell, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, and the way he never raised his voice or hand to any of them, even when Rebecca accidentally broke one of his cups. "I don't understand him," she concluded. "Perhaps I've been damaged too deeply to recognize simple decency when I see it, or perhaps I'm right to be cautious. Time will tell." The church social marked a turning point for the Thornton sisters. Dressed in new calico dresses sewn by Sarah, they accompanied Garrett to the gathering behind the small white church in Oro Grande. The entire town seemed to be there, curious about the newcomers. "Maxwell, brought your household, I see," called Reverend Thomas, a kindly man with silver hair. "Ladies, welcome to our community." Throughout the afternoon, the sisters were introduced to the townsfolk. Some were genuinely welcoming, others barely concealed their speculation about the relationship between Garrett and 3 young women living under his roof. "Causing quite a stir, aren't we?" Emily murmured to Sarah as they helped serve lemonade. "Let them talk," Sarah replied. "We know the truth." The highlight of the social was the announcement of a proper dance to be held the following month to celebrate the completion of the town's new schoolhouse. Rebecca was ecstatic at the news she would soon have a school to attend, and Emily blushed when the blacksmith's young apprentice asked if he might call on her sometime. Sarah watched it all with mixed emotions. She was grateful for her sister's happiness, but found herself increasingly aware of Garrett Maxwell's presence wherever he moved through the crowd. He cut a striking figure in his best shirt and polished boots, and she wasn't the only woman to notice. Several unmarried ladies from town made a point of engaging him in conversation, including the widow Carson, whose husband had left her the deed to the general store. "Your employer seems popular," Mrs. Henderson commented, appearing at Sarah's elbow. "Eligible rancher like that won't stay single long in these parts." "He's not my employer," Sarah corrected automatically. "He's our guardian." Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow. "Mighty young guardian for a woman grown like yourself. No relation, I hear." "It's complicated," Sarah said, unwilling to explain the circumstances. Always is, the older woman replied with a knowing look that made Sarah uncomfortable. On the ride home, Rebecca chattered excitedly about the school while Emily was unusually quiet, thinking about the blacksmith's apprentice. Sarah stared at the darkening landscape, lost in her own thoughts. "You're awfully quiet," Garrett observed, glancing at her. "Just tired," she lied. It was a long day. In truth, she was troubled by the strange sensation she'd felt watching Garrett interact with the widow Carson, something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. The realization alarmed her. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for the man who had rescued them. Such feelings would only complicate an already unusual situation. The following weeks brought a rhythm to their lives. Garrett continued working to improve the ranch, bringing in 2 more horses and beginning construction on an addition to the house. True to his word, he enrolled Rebecca in the new school, arranging for her to ride in with the neighbors' children each day. Emily's friendship with the blacksmith's apprentice, Daniel, blossomed into a courtship that Garrett carefully monitored without interfering. Sarah threw herself into making the ranch house a home, planting flowers by the porch, canning vegetables from the garden, and creating the kind of warm, loving environment she'd always dreamed of as a child. Sometimes she caught Garrett watching her work, a thoughtful expression on his face that made her heart beat faster. One evening, as she sat on the porch mending one of his shirts, Garrett joined her with 2 cups of coffee. They had fallen into the habit of sharing this quiet time after supper while Emily helped Rebecca with her schoolwork inside. "Spoke with Simmons at the bank today," Garrett said, settling into the chair beside her. "He mentioned something interesting." Sarah looked up from her mending. "Oh." "Said your father's been asking about you in town. Apparently, he's telling folks you 3 were kidnapped." Sarah's hand stilled. "What?" Garrett's expression was grim. "Don't worry. Simmons knows the truth. Most folks in town have figured out what kind of man Thornton is. But I thought you should know he's been making noise." Is he looking for us?" "Seems to be," Garrett confirmed. "Though I suspect it's the money he's after, not you girls. Probably drank through what I paid him already." Sarah set aside her mending, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. "What if he comes here?" "He won't get past the front gate," Garrett assured her, his voice hard. "You're safe, Sarah, I promise." She believed him, she realized. Somewhere along the way, she had come to trust that Garrett Maxwell would protect them, no matter what. The knowledge settled in her chest like a warm coal. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "And for everything else." Their eyes met in the fading light, and something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings neither had acknowledged. Garrett reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "Sarah," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Garrett was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the gun at his hip as he stepped in front of Sarah. A rider appeared in the gathering dusk, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Sarah's breath caught as the horse drew closer, and the rider's face became visible in the light spilling from the house. "Maxwell," Silas Thornton's voice carried on the evening air, slurred with drink. "Bring out my daughters, you thieving bastard." Sarah froze, terror rooting her to the spot. Behind her, she heard the door open as Emily and Rebecca came to investigate the commotion. "Get inside," Garrett ordered them without taking his eyes off Silas. "All of you." "I'm not leaving you to face him alone," Sarah said, finding her voice. Garrett turned to her briefly. "Please, Sarah. Take your sisters inside and lock the door. This won't take long." Something in his tone made her obey. She hurried Emily and Rebecca into the house, but instead of locking the door, she grabbed the shotgun Garrett kept above the fireplace. With trembling hands, She loaded it the way he had taught her, then positioned herself at the window where she could see and hear what was happening outside. Silas had dismounted, swaying slightly as he faced Garrett in the yard. Even from a distance, Sarah could smell the whiskey on him. "You stole my property," Silas accused, jabbing a finger at Garrett. "Thought you could just ride in and take what's mine." "I paid you fair and square," Garrett replied evenly. $750 for 3 women and a horse. You agreed to the deal." "Changed my mind," Silas sneered. "Jameson offered more for the girl, said he'd give me 500 just for Sarah." Inside, Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. Emily put an arm around her while Rebecca buried her face against Sarah's side. "The deal's done, Thornton," Garrett said, his voice hardening. "You took the money and the women are free now. They're not yours to sell anymore." Silas laughed, an ugly sound that carried clearly to the house. "Free? Women ain't free, Maxwell. They belong to their father till they belong to their husband. And since you ain't married to any of my daughters, they're still mine by rights." "Not by any rights I recognize," Garrett replied. "Now get back on your horse and leave my property before I make you regret coming here." Silas's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "Think I'm afraid of you, boy?" "I've killed men before." Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She raised the shotgun, aiming it through the window. "You won't kill anyone today," Garrett said calmly. "You're drunk, outnumbered, and on my land. Leave now and we'll forget this happened." "Outnumbered?" Silas looked around, confused. "Don't see nobody but you." "The sheriff's deputy is staying in my bunkhouse," Garrett lied smoothly. "He's probably got a rifle trained on you right now, and I've got 3 women inside who'd happily put a bullet in you after what you've done to them." Sarah was impressed by Garrett's quick thinking. There was no deputy, no bunkhouse yet, but Silas was too drunk to know that. Silas hesitated, peering uncertainly toward the barn. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Garrett took a step forward. "Want to bet your life on it?" For a tense moment, Sarah thought her father might draw his gun. Then, muttering curses, Silas stumbled back to his horse. "This ain't over," he threatened as he struggled to mount. "I'll be back with the law. We'll see who's in the right then." "The law knows exactly what kind of man you are," Garrett replied. "Now go, before I change my mind about letting you leave in one piece." They watched as Silas finally managed to heave himself into the saddle and ride away, still cursing. Only when he was out of sight did Garrett turn toward the house. Sarah lowered the shotgun and opened the door. "He's gone," Garrett said unnecessarily as he stepped onto the porch. His eyes went to the weapon in Sarah's hands. "Were you planning to use that?" "If I had to," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Garrett gently took the shotgun from her. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." But they all knew Silas Thornton wouldn't give up so easily. The peaceful life they had been building was now threatened by the shadow of the past. That night, Garrett slept on a bedroll in the main room, positioned between the door and the sisters' bedroom. Sarah lay awake, listening to Rebecca's soft snores and Emily's even breathing, wondering what tomorrow would bring. When morning came with no sign of Silas or the law, they carried on with their usual routines, though Garrett made sure the house was never left unprotected. He sent word to town with a neighbor, asking the sheriff to visit when convenient. Sheriff Colton arrived the following afternoon, a weathered man with sharp eyes that missed nothing as he surveyed the ranch and its inhabitants. "Heard you might be having some trouble," he said after Garrett had introduced the sisters. Garrett explained the situation, his purchase of the girls from their abusive father, Silas's drunken visit, and the threats made. "Legally speaking, it's a gray area," the sheriff said after listening. "Man's got rights to his minor children but not adult daughters. How old are you girls?" "I'm 22, Sarah said. Emily is 19 and Rebecca is 12, the sheriff nodded. The older two are clearly free to choose their own path. The young one, he frowned. If there's evidence of abuse, no judge would send her back. There's evidence, Emily said quietly, plenty of it. Then I don't see Thornton having a legal leg to stand on, Sheriff Colton concluded. But that don't mean he won't try something foolish, especially when he's in his cups. He turned to Garrett. You armed, Maxwell? Yes, sir. Good, keep it that way. The sheriff stood to leave. I'll have a word with Thornton, make it clear he's to stay away. But you watch your back. Men like that don't take kindly to being shown up. After the sheriff left, an uneasy peace settled over the ranch. Days passed with no further sign of Silas. Rebecca returned to school, and Emily continued her courtship with Daniel, though Garrett insisted on accompanying her to town and back. Sarah tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the fear of her father's return lingered like a shadow. She found herself watching the road whenever she worked in the garden, jumping at unexpected sounds, sleeping with a knife under her pillow. Garrett noticed her anxiety. He won't hurt you again, he assured her as they sat on the porch one evening. Not while I'm breathing. It's not just me I'm worried about, she admitted. He could hurt you too, or burn the ranch while we're sleeping. He's capable of anything when he's angry. We'll be ready, Garrett promised. But we can't live in fear forever, Sarah. She looked at him then, really looked at the man who had changed their lives so completely. In the weeks they'd spent under his roof, she had come to know him as honorable, patient, and kind, everything her father was not. But there was strength there too, and a determination that matched her own. Why did you really do it? She asked suddenly. Save us, I mean. The truth. Garrett considered her question before answering. Partly because of my sister and what she went through, partly because it was the right thing to do. He paused. And partly because the moment I saw you standing on that porch with a bruise on your face and defiance in your eyes, I couldn't have ridden away if I'd wanted to. His honesty took her breath away. What are you saying? I think you know, he said softly. But I won't speak of it now, not while you still feel beholden to me. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, you'll let me know. Before Sarah could respond, they heard Rebecca's excited voice from inside the house. Emily, Daniel's here. The moment between them passed as Emily and her suitor emerged onto the porch, followed by Rebecca. Daniel had become a regular visitor, his earnest affection for Emily obvious to everyone. Mr. Maxwell, Daniel said, his voice unusually formal. Might I have a word in private? Garrett raised an eyebrow but nodded, leading the younger man toward the barn. Sarah watched them go, suspecting what the conversation might entail. He's going to ask permission to court me properly, Emily whispered, her cheeks flushed. Maybe even marry me. Sarah squeezed her sister's hand. Are you ready for that? I think I am, Emily replied, her eyes following Daniel's retreating figure. He's a good man, Sarah. He makes me feel safe and valued. Then I'm happy for you, Sarah said, meaning it despite the complicated emotions swirling inside her. Part of her rejoiced at her sister's chance for happiness, while another part wondered if such a future might ever be possible for her. When Garrett and Daniel returned, both men were smiling. Daniel approached Emily with new confidence, taking her hand in his. Miss Thornton, he said formally, though his eyes sparkled. With your guardian's permission, I'd like to court you with the intention of marriage if you'll have me. Emily's answering smile was radiant. I will, Mr. Andrews. As the young couple strolled to the garden bench for a chaperoned conversation, Garrett moved to stand beside Sarah. He's a good man, he said quietly. Hard-working, honest, he'll treat her well. I know, Sarah replied. I'm glad for her. But, Garrett prompted, hearing something in her tone. Sarah sighed. It's selfish, but I'll miss her. We've never been apart. She won't be far, Garrett pointed out. "Daniel's building a house at the edge of town. And you'll always have a home here. Sarah, you and Rebecca both, for as long as you want it." His words wrapped around her like a promise, offering security she had never known. Sarah found herself wanting to believe in the future he described, a future where they might all find happiness after so much pain. But Silas Thornton's shadow still loomed over them, a threat waiting to destroy the fragile peace they had built. The town dance to celebrate the new schoolhouse arrived on a perfect autumn evening. The Thornton sisters prepared carefully, wearing the new dresses Sarah had sewn for the occasion. Emily's blue calico complemented her fair coloring, while Rebecca twirled in her first proper party dress of green muslin. Sarah had chosen a deep rose fabric for herself, cut to flatter her slender figure. When she emerged from the bedroom, Garrett's expression made her blush. He stood in his best clothes, dark trousers, white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, unable to meet his gaze for long. "You clean up well yourself." The schoolhouse was transformed with lanterns, bunting, and flowers. A small band played on a makeshift stage, and nearly everyone in Oro Grande had turned out for the celebration. Emily immediately found Daniel, who looked at her as if she were the only woman in the room. Rebecca joined the other children playing games in the corner, leaving Sarah and Garrett standing somewhat awkwardly by the refreshment table. "Would you like to dance?" he asked as the band struck up a waltz. Sarah hesitated. "I don't know how. Pa never allowed dancing." "It's easy," Garrett assured her. "I can teach you." Before she could respond, Mrs. Henderson approached with a stranger in tow, a well-dressed man with a friendly face. "Mr. Maxwell, Miss Thornton," she greeted them. "I'd like you to meet my cousin from Santa Fe, Mr. James Whitfield. He's visiting for a few weeks." After introductions were made, Whitfield turned to Sarah. "Would you honor me with this dance, Miss Thornton?" Caught off guard, Sarah glanced at Garrett, who nodded encouragingly despite the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "I should warn you, Mr. Whitfield, I've never danced before," she admitted. "Then I shall be most careful," Whitfield replied, offering his arm. He proved to be a patient teacher and pleasant company, sharing stories of life in Santa Fe as he guided her through the steps. When the dance ended, he returned her to Garrett's side with a bow. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Thornton. Perhaps another later," he suggested. "Perhaps," Sarah replied non-committally. As Whitfield moved away, Garrett leaned closer. "Seems you've made an impression." "He was just being polite," Sarah demurred. "Besides, I stepped on his feet at least twice." Garrett smiled. "I doubt he minded." His expression grew more serious. "Sarah, about what I said the other night," but once again they were interrupted as the Reverend called for everyone's attention. The formal dedication of the schoolhouse was followed by speeches from town leaders and a special recognition of Rebecca and the other children who would benefit from the new building. The evening continued with more dancing and socializing. Sarah danced once more with Mr. Whitfield, who mentioned he might call on her if she permitted. She gave a non-committal response, her thoughts elsewhere. As the celebration wound down, Garrett gathered his household for the ride home. They were just loading into the wagon when a commotion erupted near the saloon across the street. "You cheating scoundrel!" a familiar voice bellowed. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized her father's angry shout. The sound of breaking glass followed, then more shouting. "We should go," she urged Garrett, "before he sees us." But it was too late. Silas Thornton stumbled out of the saloon, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. He spotted them immediately. "There they are," he roared, pointing an unsteady finger at the wagon. "My daughters and the man who stole them." Garrett helped Emily and Rebecca into the wagon quickly. "Stay here," he he instructed, his voice low and urgent. "If trouble starts, take the reins and go straight home. Don't wait for me." Sarah clutched his arm. "Garrett, don't, it'll be all right," he assured her, though his eyes were hard as he watched Silas approaching. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Sheriff Colton pushed his way through, placing himself between Silas and Garrett's wagon. "That's enough, Thornton," he ordered. "Go sleep it off." "Not till I get my property back," Silas insisted, trying to shove past the sheriff. "He took my girls and my horse. He paid you fair and square," someone in the crowd called. "Everyone knows it, the horse maybe," Silas conceded with a sneer. "But a man can't sell his daughters in this territory. It's against the law," the sheriff sighed. "Your adult daughters are free to go where they please, Thornton, and given your reputation, no judge would force the young one back to your care." "Is that so?" Silas's bloodshot eyes fixed on Sarah in the wagon. "Tell them, girl. Tell them how this man bought you like cattle and keeps you at his ranch for his pleasure." Gasps and murmurs ran through the crowd. Sarah felt sick at the implication, but before she could respond, Garrett stepped forward. "That's a lie," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "Miss Thornton and her sisters are under my protection, nothing more. I paid their father to free them from his abuse, not to possess them myself." "It's true," Emily added, standing up in the wagon. "Our father beat us and tried to sell Sarah to Jameson's saloon. Mr. Maxwell saved us." More murmurs from the crowd, this time sympathetic. Everyone knew what happened to girls who worked at Jameson's. Silas, realizing he was losing his audience, changed tactics. "Fine, keep the older ones. They're damaged goods anyway, but the child belongs with her father. It's the law." Rebecca shrank back, terror written on her face. Sarah put a protective arm around her. "The law also forbids child abuse," the sheriff pointed out. "Which I've heard plenty about regarding how you treat your daughters." "Lies," Silas spat. "All lies." "I've seen the scars myself," Mrs. Henderson called out, "when the girls were getting fitted for dresses. No child gets marks like that from accidents." The tide of public opinion was turning decisively against Silas, and he knew it. His hand moved toward his gun. "Don't," the sheriff warned, his own hand on his weapon. "Don't make this worse than it already is, Thornton." For a tense moment, Sarah thought her father might draw anyway. Then, with a string of curses, he backed down. "This ain't over," he threatened, glaring at Garrett. "I'll be watching. One day you'll let your guard down, and then we'll see who gets what's coming to them." As Silas staggered away, the crowd dispersed, many offering sympathetic words to the Thornton sisters. The sheriff approached the wagon. "You folks all right?" Garrett nodded grimly. "For now. But he's not going to give up, is he?" "Men like that rarely do," Sheriff Colton agreed. "I'd keep a sharp eye out if I were you." The ride home was subdued, each lost in their own thoughts. Rebecca fell asleep against Emily's shoulder, exhausted from the excitement and fear. When they reached the ranch, Garrett helped carry the sleeping child to bed while Sarah made coffee. "We need to talk," she said when he returned to the kitchen. Emily had also retired, leaving them alone. Garrett nodded, accepting the cup she offered. "About what happened tonight, about everything." Sarah sat across from him at the table. "What my father said about you keeping us for." "For your pleasure. People will talk now." "People always talk," Garrett replied. "It doesn't matter what they think, doesn't it? What about your reputation? What about Emily's courtship with Daniel? His family might object if they believe we're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Garrett's expression was troubled. "I hadn't thought of that." He was silent for a moment. "There's an obvious solution, of course." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What's that?" "I could leave," he said simply. "Sign the ranch over to you and your sisters, move on somewhere else." That would stop the rumors. The suggestion hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Leave? But this is your home, your dream. There are other dreams, Garrett said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. Other ranches, but there's only one solution that would let me stay and protect all our reputations. Sarah held her breath, afraid to hope she understood his meaning. Which is marriage, he said, the word hanging between them in the quiet kitchen. If you were my wife, no one could question your presence here or my motives in helping you. A marriage of convenience, Sarah clarified, her voice carefully neutral. Garrett hesitated. It could start that way, yes, for appearance's sake. He reached across the table to take her hand. But Sarah, I think you know my feelings run deeper than that. I've grown to care for you more than I thought possible in such a short time. Sarah stared at their joined hands. Garrett, a gunshot shattered the night, followed by the sound of breaking glass. They both dove to the floor as a second shot splintered the window frame. Stay down, Garrett ordered, crawling to the gun rack. He passed Sarah a shotgun before taking his rifle. Get to the girls. Keep them away from the windows. Heart pounding, Sarah made her way to the bedroom where her sisters slept. Emily was already awake, holding a terrified Rebecca. What's happening? Emily whispered. Pa, Sarah replied grimly. Stay down and away from the windows. Another shot rang out, followed by Garrett's return fire. Silence fell, broken only by Rebecca's muffled sobs. Is Mr. Maxwell all right? The child asked. I'm sure he is, Sarah reassured her, though fear clawed at her throat. He knows how to handle himself. Minutes stretched like hours as they huddled in the darkness. Finally, they heard Garrett's voice calling from the main room. Sarah, girls, are you all right? We're fine, Sarah called back, relief washing over her. Is he gone? I think so. Stay put until I'm sure. They heard the front door open and close as Garrett went to check the property. When he returned, his expression was grim. He's gone, but he left this. He held up a crude note nailed to an arrow that had been shot into the door. Says he'll be back, and next time he won't miss. Sarah felt cold dread settle in her stomach. This won't end until one of you is dead, will it? Garrett's silence was answer enough. That night, they took turns keeping watch. When morning came with no further sign of Silas, Garrett rode into town to speak with the sheriff while Sarah and Emily repaired the broken window. What are we going to do? Emily asked as they worked. We can't live like this, jumping at every sound, afraid to sleep. Sarah had been thinking all night about Garrett's proposal, both what it offered and what it might cost them. There might be a solution, she said carefully. Garrett suggested marriage. Emily's eyes widened. Marriage to you. For protection and respectability, Sarah explained. To silence the rumors and give us all a secure place here. But do you love him? Emily pressed. Sarah paused, the question forcing her to confront feelings she had been avoiding. I think I could, she admitted. He's everything Pa isn't: kind, honorable, gentle, and sometimes when he looks at me. He loves you, Emily said with certainty. Anyone can see that. Even if that's true, is it enough? What if I'm too broken to be a real wife to him? What if I can never trust a man completely after what Pa did to us? Emily put down her hammer. Sarah, you're the strongest person I know. If anyone can overcome the past, it's you, she smiled. Besides, you already trust him with your life and ours. That's a good start, isn't it? When Garrett returned that afternoon, he brought news from town. The sheriffs organized a search party. They're combing the hills for Thornton now. Will they find him? Sarah asked. Eventually, Garrett replied, though he didn't sound convinced. A man can't stay hidden forever. That evening, after Rebecca was asleep and Emily had retired, Sarah found Garrett on the porch, rifle across his knees as he watched the darkening landscape. We need to talk about your proposal, she said, sitting beside him. Garrett turned to her, his expression guarded. I haven't changed my mind, if that's what you're wondering. Nor have I reached a decision, she countered. but I need to understand what you're offering. Would this be a true marriage in all ways or merely an arrangement for protection and respectability? His gaze was steady. I want a real marriage, Sarah. A partnership based on mutual respect and affection that might grow into something deeper with time. He took her hand. But I would never force anything you weren't ready for. Sarah considered his words. And if I never am, if the scars my father left run too deep, then we would find our own way forward, Garrett said simply. There's more to marriage than what happens in the bedroom. His understanding touched her deeply. I care for you, she admitted, more than I thought possible after everything that's happened, but I'm afraid. Of what? Of losing myself again, she whispered. Of becoming someone's property, even someone as kind as you. Garrett's expression softened. Sarah, the last thing I want is to own you. I want to stand beside you, not above you. The sincerity in his voice broke through the last of her defenses. She leaned forward, hesitantly, and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss, her first ever given freely. When they parted, Garrett looked at her with wonder. Is that a yes? Sarah nodded, a strange mixture of fear and hope filling her chest. Yes, I'll marry you, Garrett Maxwell. The next morning, they rode into town together to make arrangements. The Reverend agreed to perform the ceremony the following Sunday, and Mrs. Henderson promised to help prepare a suitable wedding dress. Word spread quickly through the small community, most responding with approval to news of the upcoming marriage. Emily was delighted. Daniel's parents relieved that any question of impropriety was being resolved, and Rebecca simply happy that they would continue to live at the ranch she had come to love. Only, the continued threat of Silas Thornton cast a shadow over their plans. The search parties had found signs of his camp in the hills, but no trace of the man himself. Sheriff Colton posted deputies around town and promised to have men at the wedding itself. But Sarah couldn't shake the fear that her father would find a way to destroy her chance at happiness. The night before the wedding, as Sarah tried on her completed dress, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored fabric with lace at the collar and cuffs, Emily and Rebecca watched with tears in their eyes. You look like an angel, Rebecca declared. Or a queen, Emily added. Garrett won't be able to take his eyes off you. Sarah studied her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed like a stranger, confident, hopeful, almost pretty despite the fading bruise on her cheek. Could this really be her future? A life with a man who treated her with respect and kindness, who saw her as a partner rather than a possession. I never thought I'd have this, she confessed to her sisters. After everything Pa did, I thought no decent man would want me. Garrett's not just any man, Emily said softly. And you deserve every happiness, Sarah. Both of you do. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the hills and thinking about the steps she was about to take. Whatever fears she still harbored, one thing was certain: she would rather face an uncertain future with Garrett Maxwell than return to the certainty of her past. Dawn broke clear and bright over Oro Grande on the day Sarah Thornton was to become Sarah Maxwell. The small church was decorated with wildflowers gathered by Rebecca and her school friends. Nearly everyone in town had turned out for the occasion, curious to witness the union that had sparked so much gossip. Emily helped Sarah dress, arranging her hair with ribbons and tucking a sprig of desert sage into the simple knot at the nape of her neck. Something borrowed, she said, pinning a cameo brooch that had belonged to Mrs. Henderson to Sarah's bodice. Something blue, she added, tying a blue ribbon around her sister's wrist. And something new. She presented Sarah with a pair of delicate lace gloves. Where did you get these? Sarah asked, touched by the gift. Daniel helped me order them from Santa Fe, Emily admitted. They arrived yesterday. Do you like them? They are beautiful, Sarah said, slipping them on. "Thank you." As the church bells began to ring, calling everyone to the ceremony, Sheriff Colton arrived to escort them safely to the church. His deputies were positioned around town, watching for any sign of Silas Thornton. "No sign of him," the sheriff reported. "Looks like he's moved on, at least for now." Sarah wasn't convinced, but she refused to let fear ruin this day. Garrett would be waiting for her, and nothing, not even her father, would stop her from joining him. The small church was filled to capacity when Sarah entered on Sheriff Colton's arm. Emily preceded her as maid of honor, and Rebecca scattered flower petals along the aisle, but Sarah saw none of it. Her eyes were fixed on Garrett, standing tall and proud at the altar, looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Reverend Thomas smiled as he began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to unite this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As they exchanged vows, Sarah's voice grew stronger with each promise. This was right, she realized. Whatever came after this moment, choosing Garrett, being chosen by him, was perfect. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared. "You may kiss your bride." Garrett's kiss was gentle but certain, a promise of all that might come. The congregation erupted in applause as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife. The celebration moved to the hotel dining room, where tables groaned under the weight of food brought by well-wishers. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears of joy. For a few hours, Sarah allowed herself to forget the shadow that had hung over them, immersing herself in the happiness of the moment. As evening approached, Garrett took her hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Maxwell?" The title sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she replied. "I am." They said their goodbyes, hugging Emily and Rebecca tightly. Emily would stay in town with Mrs. Henderson for the night, keeping Rebecca with her to give the newlyweds privacy. Tomorrow, Daniel would escort them back to the ranch. The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought about the step they had taken and what lay ahead. When they reached the ranch, Garrett lifted Sarah from the wagon and carried her across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. "Welcome home," he said softly. Sarah looked around at the house that had become her sanctuary. Someone, probably Emily, had prepared for their return, cleaning everything thoroughly and placing vases of wildflowers on the table and mantel. A bottle of wine and 2 glasses stood ready. "It's perfect," she said. Garrett poured wine for both of them. "To new beginnings," he toasted. "To family," Sarah added. They drank, eyes locked over the rims of their glasses. Setting down his wine, Garrett took her hands in his. "Sarah, I meant what I said before. We can take this as slowly as you need. I want you to feel safe and comfortable." Her heart swelled at his consideration. "I know, and I'm grateful for that." She took a deep breath. "But I don't want to let fear rule me anymore. I want to be your wife in every way." The night that followed was a revelation to Sarah. Where she had expected pain and submission, she found tenderness and mutual pleasure. Garrett's patience and gentle guidance helped her discover aspects of herself she never knew existed. For the first time, she understood that physical love could be beautiful rather than brutal. Afterward, lying in his arms, Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Garrett asked, alarmed. "No," she assured him. "I'm crying because I didn't know it could be like this, that a man could be gentle and think of a woman's pleasure before his own." He kissed her forehead. "That's how it should always be between us." As she drifted toward sleep, Sarah realized something fundamental had shifted within her. The wall she had built around her heart was crumbling, allowing love to grow in its place. Their honeymoon was brief but sweet. For 3 days they rarely left the house, learning each other's bodies and minds, talking for hours about their hopes for the future. Garrett spoke of expanding the ranch, breeding more horses, perhaps adding cattle. Sarah shared her dreams of making the house a true home, planting an orchard, maybe adopting more children who needed safety and love. On the fourth day, Emily and Rebecca returned, full of stories about their time in town. Life settled into a new rhythm, different but familiar. 3 weeks after the wedding, Sheriff Colton rode out to the ranch with news. "Found Thornton's camp abandoned," he reported. "Tracks leading south toward the border. Looks like he's gone for good." Sarah didn't believe it, not completely, but as days turned to weeks with no sign of her father, she allowed herself to hope he had indeed left the territory. Life on the Maxwell ranch flourished. Emily's courtship with Daniel progressed, leading to their own wedding the following spring. They built a small house at the edge of the ranch property, close enough for frequent visits, but affording the young couple privacy to begin their own family. Rebecca thrived in school, her natural intelligence earning praise from her teachers. She blossomed from a frightened child into a confident young girl, the shadows of her early years fading with each passing month. And Sarah found herself growing into the role of wife and partner with surprising ease. The ranch prospered under their joint management, Garrett handling the livestock and land, Sarah overseeing the household and garden, both consulting each other on major decisions. Their love deepened with time, building on the foundation of mutual respect they had established from the beginning. When Sarah discovered she was expecting their first child a year after their wedding, Garrett's joy confirmed what she already knew, that she had found not just safety but true happiness with this man. The baby, a boy they named James, was born on a clear spring morning with Emily serving as midwife. Garrett wept when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the miracle Sarah had given him. "He's perfect," he whispered, "just like his mother." As James grew, the ranch expanded. Garrett's breeding program proved successful, with the Army purchasing several horses each year. They added cattle, hired hands, built a proper bunkhouse. The original house was enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with a special room for Rebecca's books and studies. 2 years after James, their daughter Elizabeth joined the family, followed by Thomas a year later. Emily and Daniel had 2 children of their own, creating a close-knit extended family that gathered regularly for Sunday dinners and celebrations. And still, despite the peace they had found, Sarah kept a watchful eye on the horizon. Some part of her never fully believed her father was gone for good. 5 years after her wedding, as Sarah was hanging laundry with 4-year-old James helping by handing her clothespins, she spotted a lone rider approaching from the south. Something about the silhouette made her blood run cold. "James, go inside and find your father," she said calmly, though her heart raced. "Tell him we have a visitor." The boy ran off, and Sarah moved to the porch where Garrett kept a loaded shotgun hidden from the children but accessible in emergencies. She had it in her hands by the time the rider drew close enough to recognize. Silas Thornton had aged dramatically in 5 years. His hair had gone completely gray, his face was deeply lined, and he rode hunched over like a much older man. But the malice in his eyes remained unchanged as he spotted Sarah on the porch. "So you're still here," he called, reining in his horse a safe distance away. "Playing house with the rancher." "This is my home," Sarah replied steadily, the shotgun visible but not raised. "What do you want, Silas?" He laughed at her use of his name rather than Pa. "Fancy now, aren't you? Got too good for your own father. You stopped being my father the first time you raised your hand to me," she said. "State your business or leave. My husband will be here any moment." As if summoned by her words, Garrett emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. 2 ranch hands followed, similarly armed. "Thornton," Garrett acknowledged coldly, You're trespassing on private property." Silas spat on the ground. "Just came to see what you've made of my daughters. Heard in town that Emily married that blacksmith's boy, and the little one's some kind of scholar now." His gaze shifted back to Sarah. "And you got yourself a fine house and a passel of brats, I hear." "If you've said what you came to say, you can ride out now," Garrett suggested, his voice deceptively calm. "Otherwise, we'll be forced to remove you." Silas ignored him, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Sarah. "You think you've won, don't you? Escaped old Silas and made yourself a lady." He laughed, an ugly sound. "But you'll always be mine, girl. My blood runs in your veins and in those children of yours. You can't escape what you are." Sarah felt a chill at his words, but she stood her ground. "You're wrong. I chose who I became, just as Emily did and Rebecca will. Your blood means nothing compared to the lives we've built." Fury twisted Silas's features. His hand moved toward his gun, but before he could draw, Sarah raised the shotgun in a fluid motion and fired a warning shot into the air. "The next one won't miss," she promised, her voice steady. "Leave now and don't come back. You have no power here anymore." For a long moment, Silas glared at her, hatred burning in his eyes. Then, with a stream of curses, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away. Garrett was at her side instantly, taking the shotgun and pulling her into his arms. "Are you all right?" Sarah nodded against his chest, surprised to find she was trembling not with fear but with a strange sense of release. "I'm fine. Better than fine." She looked up at him. "I think I'm free of him at last." That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Garrett sat on the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. The ranch was peaceful under the starlight, the only sounds the occasional lowing of cattle and the chirping of crickets. "You think he'll come back?" Garrett asked, his arm around her shoulders. Sarah considered the question. "No, I saw something in his eyes today, defeat. He knows he's lost." She leaned against her husband's solid warmth. "Besides, he's killing himself faster than anyone else could. I'd be surprised if he lasts another year the way he's going." "I'm proud of you," Garrett said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Standing up to him like that. You're the strongest woman I've ever known." Sarah smiled, thinking of all they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. "Not strong alone," she corrected. "Strong because I have you and Emily and Rebecca and the children. Strong because I'm loved." Garrett turned her face to his and kissed her deeply. "Always," he promised, "always loved." In the years that followed, Silas Thornton became little more than a fading memory. Word reached them occasionally of his movements drifting through mining camps, getting into trouble, spending time in jail for drunkenness and fighting. When news finally came of his death in a saloon brawl across the border in Mexico, Sarah felt nothing but a distant pity for the man who had once held such power over her life. Emily and Daniel's business thrived as Oro Grande grew into a proper town. Their children played with Sarah and Garrett's brood, cousins growing up like siblings. Rebecca, brilliant and determined, eventually left for college back east, returning years later as a qualified teacher who transformed the little schoolhouse where she had once been a student. And Sarah and Garrett grew old together on the land they had worked to build, their partnership deepening with each passing season. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the grandchildren had been put to bed after a day of adventures on the ranch, Sarah would look at her husband, his hair now silver, his face lined with the years but his eyes still as kind as the day he had ridden into her life, and marvel at the journey that had brought them here. "What are you thinking?" he would ask, catching her gaze, and Sarah would smile, taking his weathered hand in hers. That sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, and that love, real love, doesn't possess or control, it frees. In the end, That was the greatest lesson of her life, that true love had the power to heal even the deepest wounds, to rebuild what had been broken, and to create something beautiful from the ashes of despair. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and Rebecca's students who had come to honor the couple who had done so much for their community, Sarah looked around at the legacy they had created together. "We did well, didn't we?" she whispered to Garrett as they watched the younger generations dancing under lantern light in the yard of the ranch that had become a haven for so many. "We did," he agreed, his eyes reflecting the same wonder she felt. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. That day I rode onto your father's property looking for a horse, and found 3 frightened girls instead," Sarah finished. "No," Garrett corrected her gently. "I found my future that day. Everything that matters in my life began when I met you." As the music played and their family celebrated around them, Sarah Thornton Maxwell rested her head on her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the path that had begun in fear and desperation had led to a lifetime of love and healing, not just for her, but for all who had found shelter in the home they had built together.